how can we nurture a thriving team culture across different places? Anybody that's voted for that, that would either like to share some thoughts or some questions on that? Yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, it's something I've done to an extent in the past, and especially not recently, but around 3 years ago, I think I had, it was actually quite challenging. There were teams split across the US, Europe, and Asia. So trying to find a time when everybody's available for talks. We were doing some calls at 10 o'clock at night and some of them at like 6 in the morning. This was enforced by other people that were there before. That was just unworkable. You have to accept, if you're across, you know, very kind of wide time zones, you need to have some kind of asynchronous way of communicating and building that culture. And that's something that I did to an extent, I think, but I certainly struggled with it. And that's something I'm keen to kind of pick up on, particularly where it's hybrid, where there's a mix of remote and an office presence in one or more offices, is how we can kind of improve that overall culture. Things like the psychological safety that comes with it and general teamwork, with things like virtual, you know, water coolers, Slack channels for ad hoc chat, sharing jokes and, you know, cat pictures and things. That goes some way, but there are cases where some people only get together once a year for, you know, cost and logistical reasons. So I'm keen, obviously, to pick up on anything like that that might help.
I would like to share my experience. Currently, my team is distributed across the globe, from Melbourne, Philippines, Pakistan, India, Egypt, and San Francisco. And obviously, it's not as simple in terms of managing all the time zones during the day. But what a good way that we how we manage to have a good culture in the company is allowing all those software engineers to manage the working hours by themselves. Because obviously we cannot respect the 8 to 5 paradigm, especially across different time zones, but also they have personal needs like kids or family duties and etc. And so for them sometimes it's very good having working by night or working in the evening. So fundamentally in our culture we are not measuring the hours that they are working or when they are online, but we have some touch point that are the stand-ups, and then we measure fundamentally the amount of value that they produce. So fundamentally, if the features are there, are working, and etc. This made them extremely. This is my perception, obviously. I could have a bias. They are very happy about the environment where they are working. Currently, we never had people leaving us in the last 18 months. And in front of, we are a small startup, we had a problem arriving at the end of our 2 years period. We needed to, for 2 months, having a sacrifice in our salary, and they accept for 2 months for the good of the company to do it. And that for us was a benchmark that they were extremely satisfied about how we deal with their work-life balance, and also with the respect of their festivities, religious belief, etc. We have many Muslims. Friday they prefer not working because they have their prayers. Other are from other religions, and so we don't push, example, deadlines during religious festivals. This is my experience.
Can I?
Go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely,
Yes.
Mark. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, we have people in 4 locations: Malaysia, Lisbon, Skopje, and Ukraine. And I think to create a good culture, it's important that the view of the person is permeated through the whole organization, so everybody feels equal. You don't have people that feel, oh, the dog work gets pushed to us in Malaysia while all the smart work gets done by the people in London. That kind of stuff. So it has to be, if you come with the skills, then you're on equal footing. Doesn't really matter where you are. If you have a preference for one location, even indirectly, then that can really foul up the culture. I also think it's important to plan the physical FaceTime. So you then make events that, you know, this week it's a bank holiday, we all meet in, I don't know, we all meet, it could be somewhere else, we all meet in a third place, but everybody comes to maybe the Lisbon office, and they have a do there, they work there, they work for 1 week, they work together with colleagues, and there's some things going on. That is, as everybody's working from home, as everybody is slightly detached, and it becomes difficult to have retention if you only the only way you see your company is on a Teams meeting or Zoom call, and then the paycheck. If another Zoom call comes with a better paycheck, well, then why not move? But if it's your friends, then it's a different thing. And as once you've got that personal thing, then you can take quite long times. And then I think it's a leadership. But what makes people stay is not the boss's speech at the Christmas dinner. It is the quality of the work. How much you're valued and engaged by your immediate peers and reports, and how that work actually interesting for you. So does it align with you, because there are horses for courses. So basically retention and culture is 80% determined at the time of hiring. So I also think there's a big part of, if you want a specific culture, you should hire for that culture. You can't really turn an arrogant prima donna, super talented person into a docile team player. There are stretches that are too big. And we have clients that are both. We have some that love prima donnas and some that really, really hate them. And there's not a right or a wrong culture, but you will have a culture, and it's good that permeates the whole team and not conflicts the team.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark.
Just add to that, I think I completely agree with that. And I think one of the things I found potentially is the first to go when you're talking to finance is any kind of budget that goes with that kind of bringing people together and the kind of social aspect, because it's easy to kind of say, well, it's not that important, therefore we don't need to spend money on it. And I think it's the exact opposite is true. It's you really kind of have to invest, put a bit of money where your mouth is, and when you bring people together, as you say, really plan the events, really make sure there's a big social aspect to it that allows people to build those personal relationships, not just kind of develop their professional ones. And it's those personal peer-to-peer bonds that kind of really help people, I think, and help teams act as a team instead of just a group of people.
Great. Thanks, Richard, and thanks, Mark and Alessio. I'll go in the order of hands raised. And Jim, I think you're first to raise your hand on that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to actually share one kind of not really a war story, well, I suppose it is, and then also just reflect on some of my own experiences on this topic. So one was just to reflect. I can't remember exactly who it was who was saying about treating teams the same, treating individuals the same across the whole organization. I saw a really good example of where that was not done well, and it was essentially with I guess it was an organization with sort of intelligence and military connections, and they sort of managed to, I guess, what's the word, sort of inherit some of the attitude of the military, and that there was like the sort of officers club, and then there were the squaddies, and they were in different locations, and there was a very toxic relationship between the two sites. So that took a lot of unpicking, I think. And then the other thing I was just going to kind of talk about was one particular practice which we employed in my previous organization, which was quite straightforward, but just worked very well, which was really just the 1 day a week of getting the whole team together. So this was a small organization, and it essentially, by having a highly ritualized day, and it might have been like possibly once every couple of weeks, but certainly the assumption was, okay, everyone must be coming in, and we have a very clear agenda set for the day, and this is how we're going to be using the time. It actually worked very well with the engineers because it showed that the rest of their time away from the office was respected in terms of focus time, etc. And really, we found that that worked very well in terms of building team relationships and building a healthy culture, because on that day everyone came together, and it was a very clearly, this is the time. You know, people were very engaged on that day, and it just worked really effectively. Yeah, that's just a couple of observations from myself.
Bro, thanks, Jim. Nick, I think you were next in line.
Yeah, thanks very much. I would echo a lot of what's already been said. Very much about building relationships and being able to keep them up and running, whether it's going to be on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis. Echoing what Jim and others have said, that I mean, one of the particular organisations I work with, we had an all hands call every month, and every third month, so once a quarter, we would actually get everybody in one single location. There'd be a great social side, as well as an active promoting and making sure that everybody's up to date. They understand what the strategic and main tactical things are that are going on, but also breakouts for local teams as well. And then a great social in the evening. Everyone gets to stay overnight and then leave relatively late the following morning because they've all got thick heads. But we also found that just day-to-day routines as well, with shared stand-ups, even with people that are geographically dispersed, whether it's in one location you're doing the stand-up because it's the beginning of the day, or you're doing it at the end of your day if you're somewhere else on the planet, and just getting that cadence brought together. Also communication, proactive communication, particularly when there's change or there's focus going through, whether it was COVID or what have you as well. Having those all-hand calls, but making sure that they're recorded and then made available. We also made sure that there were, we would have open door sessions, so AMAs, that's me anything, for the senior leadership team, so that absolutely anything and everything could be put on the table. No question was put off, and you do get some quite entertaining and difficult questions, but what it means is it just builds that trust and openness, and that when you do come to the point where maybe there's a salary sacrifice or there's something not so wonderful going on in the company, you've built those relationships before you actually have to pull on them. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Mark.
Mark, me?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I got confused there for a minute. Yeah, I raised my hand because I think it was something that Mark said, and it reminded me of a really great video by, I think it was the RSA, I'll try to find it, about motivation. It's particularly where many people think that it's money that motivates a lot of people. I'll try to find the link for it and share it, but it's a really good video just to have a look at and to think about, you know, motivation. It's possibly related to open source from what I remember, but just a kind of underlying message in there. And it's just another way of thinking about things and about what, you know, drives people and what keeps them happy. So I'll try and share that. But also somebody else mentioned, I'm not sure who, sorry, but with hybrid work, something I've not had the opportunity to try, but that I've heard about is some companies are doing mandatory office days where you must be in the office certain days of the week. Whereas I've heard this idea of, rather than having mandatory office days, there are mandatory work from home days. So it changes it slightly, shifts it on its head, but it's just another way of thinking about what you're kind of asking staff to do. And it's whether that would be useful or not, I don't know. It's something that came up in another meeting a while ago. So I just thought I'd throw it out there. I've not had a chance to look into it or think about it properly, but it just kind of popped in my half asleep brain at the moment, so I thought I'd share.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. Richard, I've seen a hand go up just at the end there. Can I just get a show of thumbs from everyone to stay on this topic or shift to a different topic? Just because I just want to make sure that we go where roughly people are. Stay on this one, stay on this one, stay on this one. Cool. Richard, over to you then.
Yeah, the kind of mandatory days, I'm just curious to know how people feel about that, because when we did that at the office, it went down very, very badly. And I really struggled with convincing the kind of senior management, this was at which, that it really wasn't working, because the team were focused on good events to come in for and reasons to come in, going back to kind of social events or particular workshopping days or any reason why you might want to get a group of people together, rather than you've got to be in on a Wednesday and a Thursday. It's like, well, that's just arbitrary days that might work for people in finance but have got nothing to do with engineering. So I'm just curious to know, I saw one person kind of shaking their head on the mandatory days in the office, so I was just interested to know if anyone had any positive experiences of it, or whether that was a kind of unilateral thing that I'd experienced.
I mean, I can offer that there's some people, although many people love to work at home, some people can't. They might have screaming kids and a girlfriend they really want to get away from. At least they've got those 8-9 hours away, and being forced to stay there. They might not have the work situation. It might be a noisy apartment with no real room for an office. So there's lots of individual blanket statements like you all stay at home. I don't think that's a very good idea. And coming to the office because it's the day we come to the office, but there's no agenda, I think that is not going to, that's just going to irritate people. And then they get more susceptible. They listen more when a recruiter calls them up and says they have a great job offer.
Nick, yeah, do you want to answer that? You're on mute, Nick.
Always useful. For the days that we didn't have an agenda and we were trying to get people to come in, preferably like mixture of Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, but particularly on a Tuesday. We had 2 different offices, one in Birmingham, one in Godalming. We always made it first Tuesday pizzas. So you would get essentially a bribe of some free food to come in, and there would usually be a social afterwards in the evening to maybe just go for a quick pint at the pub around the corner. And we would try and drive weekly team meetings at that time as well. So even if they were going to be hybrid, if we could get as many of those people in the same room at the same time in the same office, it always made life a lot easier. And it seemed to work really well. And it did provide a lot of momentum around Tuesdays, but correspondingly less on other days. And Fridays and Mondays, you'd be lucky to find anyone. If you wanted a really quiet office that was nice and cold on a hot summer, then a Monday or a Friday was the place to go, because you were the only person being cooled down.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. Pedro.
Yeah, this is more like an open question, because I was wondering, some companies say that you were saying you need to work from the office or work from home. I'm biased because I'm building a company that is doing kind of working from a co-working space is where I'm now. But I was wondering, what is the problem, or if it's the issues working from home, so you can be lazy and do nothing. That's what people is scared of. It's okay if you go to the office and your boss is not there. Is that all right? Or it's okay if instead of going to the office, the company pays for a co-working space, because as you were saying, your house is not the best place to work. So I'm wondering what is the problem? Or maybe because here in the city, if you come to the city and you buy something at the shop, so the landlord, which owns almost everything, are happy because those shops can pay the rent. I'm kind of curious, and that's kind of an open question.
Yeah, Richard.
Are you asking if you can trust people, Pedro?
I can't, but maybe other can. I don't know. Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think there needs to be a leap of faith at the beginning, I think, with people working remotely and working from home. And as long as you're kind of managing people and seeing what they're doing in terms of their work, the vast majority of people want to do a good job. There are very few out there who will deliberately take the piss and try to abuse, you know, that level of trust that they've been given. You know, it will go against most people's kind of natural instinct. And I think there is at the beginning, I call it a leap of faith, if you like, in lots of situations. You know, trust is something that needs to be earned. So, I mean, especially at the beginning with new people, you know, it's just a case of keeping an eye on them, having regular contact and communication to make sure that, you know, you can see some kind of progress. And it is scary. And there will be times where people do take the piss, but, you know, over time, they will be found out relatively quickly, the people that do that. You know, if you want, you give them, you know, a very severe single warning. And if they carry on, then it's the same as somebody being in the office taking a piss. You know, you say goodbye. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, but it's more like why? I mean, if it's about trust, why is so many companies are so reluctant to say, yeah, work from home? I mean, it should be the same. So I'm wondering what is the reason? Is productivity? Is because maybe they don't trust? It's just more like an open question of why we are not working from home. It technically is, I mean, it's better for everyone.
I think that, well, I think there's a lack of really hard information. So I think some people just don't trust their employees. But that's, I think, fairly clear. I think some people feel that there is a dividend to co-location, physical co-location, whether it's a productivity or a creativity one. I think if you've got, certainly in software engineering anyway, if you've got people who are engaged with their roles and enjoy what they're doing, then I don't tend to worry about people's productivity. It's when you've got kind of people who are unhappy, then they can come into the office and be unproductive, or they can work at home and be unproductive. But I definitely, from when I've pushed, so previously I've been under a lot of pressure from kind of, as you all probably experienced, when there was massive wage inflation for a couple of years around the pandemic, and certainly in publishing in particular at the FT, and at which she couldn't keep up with salaries, and so I was trying to kind of convince senior management about going fully remote or remote first. And those were certainly the messages that I was getting from the kind of board was, you know, we feel that there is a dividend to people being together. And it isn't just about productivity. It's about kind of ideation and working the kind of more than the sum of its parts, which they feel that you didn't get so much with a distributed team. No one ever presented any actual hard data to that. That was just their feeling, and that was about as much as they were willing to put down. So that was certainly my experience.
We had a client that was hiring, and they were speaking about how they wanted somebody in the office to pick up on the conversations that were going on all around them, like the engineers to just absorb that information for a similar kind of thing. You know, it's no hard evidence, and they were saying like, this is just the way we believe it, and no one's changed their mind or showed us that you can pick up on that ambient thing. There were definitely some strong opinions, you know, every which way on it. But yeah, Jim.
Yeah, so just I guess I would definitely echo a lot of what's been said there. So certainly I think fear is part of it. It's just like, okay, well, if we're not, you know, sort of keeping an eye on people, then they're not working. So, but you know, looking at it more positively, I think there is this sort of idea of cross-pollination. But actually, just to sort of pick up on what you were saying there, Barry, that, you know, the idea that you have to lean on sort of ambient information transfer just sounds like bad organization design. I don't know, maybe that's, you know, just being slightly controversial. But yeah, then the other thought that came to mind was just around the fear that ultimately, you don't need to micromanage for remote. Well, I think a lot of the fear does come from this side. I think you do have to micromanage. It's like, well, you've got to be on top of people. But if you can kind of just let go of that, as people have been saying, trust, then ultimately, as long as you do have mechanisms for explaining what is expected of people and then holding them to account, then ultimately the pigeons will come home to roost if people aren't being productive. So yeah, I see there's no reason why remote working shouldn't work very effectively, as long as you're prepared to just lean into that, the effort that's required to manage people effectively. So, yeah.
Great, thanks, Jim. Mark Batty has seen a.
Which Mark? Me, Mark?
Oh, and Mark Batty, I think, had his the virtual hand raised for.
Sorry.
For a few minutes. Are you off now?
No, it's okay. No, just to carry on with what's been said there. I mean, I think ultimately the kind of root cause for this, as many other people have said, is about this kind of fear and lack of control. But I think the actual reason for it is that most companies, once they're established, have senior leadership that come from traditional management backgrounds where they go through traditional management training and traditional mindsets. So this is all perhaps hidden somewhat now, but it comes down to the old-fashioned kind of autocratic command and control. They want to have that physical control. They want that kind of instant visibility into people and what they're doing. And I think that's part of the fear behind, you know, the work from home movement. So I just wanted to say, you know, I think that's one of the reasons. And it's also because a lot of that in that traditional management, I think it's always related for me to kind of traditional production and manufacturing, you know, going, you know, sort of Taylorism based, improving the factory line and improving the output. And if they're looking at output rather than outcome, which is, you know, a debate we can have for like 24 hours without a break, you know. But I think that's what a lot of the root cause comes down to, is that once you get past the kind of initial stages in the company, the fear sets in because it's driven from, you know, the very top at the most senior level by traditional management mindsets, rather than that more kind of flexible, you know, let's just give our guys the freedom they need and see what kind of value we get from customers with the product. And I think that's what drives it a lot. And it's certainly something that I spend a lot of time talking to people about, trying to shift their mindsets. And it makes it difficult because that type of qualitative measurement is very hard and very different from traditional, you know, quantitative, as in facts and figures that can be drawn up from a production line. I don't know whether that helps or not, but yeah.
Great, Nick and Kieran. Well, Nick, did you have any thoughts first?
Yeah, we found that there was a great disparity because before I joined a particular company, they'd run an initial employee survey and found that actually there was very little engagement, and the previous management team had absolutely trashed the relationship with the employee base. So the new management team, as which I was a part, we were trying to massively get over that step. Hence a lot of the activities that I described earlier on. What we did find as we went through the surveys and things were improving is we found that engagement within teams worked very, very well, and that teams found a way to interact, whether it was going to be a mixture of Teams and Slack, whether it was going to be online face-to-face meetings, albeit virtual, a mixture of in-person and not, but just coordinating within the team. So that relationship and that engagement worked very well. But the dog has decided to scratch his chops at the same time. Sorry. What we found, though, was a big problem between teams. And we found that through the surveys and where we were asking for comments as well and feedback, that it was like, oh, this team's all lazy, or if they got their act together, then we'd all be fine. But we love our team. And there was a lot of disparity between them. So we found that when we were actually trying to bring organized different teams together within the office, that we made sure that everyone went in the same area, because particularly one of the offices was large, and that you'd find people would just gravitate back to their team locations in different corners of the office, getting them all to work together, all working around the same kitchen, with the same food that's coming in. That really helped build everything up. And equally, when we did have the open days and people were all brought together and we were driving activities that were in there, we were consciously making sure that we were cherry picking people from different teams to work together. So just try and force that interaction and those relationships so that they would actually just build friends and be able to work. The one time, though, that we were absolutely adamant that people had to be in the office, and it was written in right at the beginning, was the first month and potentially the first 3 months, depending on performance, for a new starter, because we just needed them to, one, understand the company culture really quickly and how things worked, even when no one was watching. But equally, we needed them to be able to build relationships rapidly across the organization and within their own team. And we found it was a lot easier to do that and a lot faster if they were face-to-face. So that's where we did see value, but equally, the rest of the time, once those relationships were established, you could be anywhere on the planet and it would work.
Super interesting. Thanks, Nick. Kieran.
Yeah, no, I actually just want to sort of reiterate a point that Jim made. I think if you're relying on sort of informal connections in the office for a lot of communication, your communication structure is completely screwed. I think we're quite fortunate in my current place. It's remote first. We're research heavy, and everything as a result is written down, communicated very clearly. And I actually think what leads to much better work than I've seen done when everyone is in the office, and they get a little bit lazy sometimes in how they communicate because they can just rely on that informal communication. So yeah, when it comes to patents, papers, yeah, we're all prepared because everything has been documented very well throughout the whole process, because you have to when you're remote. There is no alternative. So I think culturally, that's one thing that we've actually really benefited from. Flip side for that is obviously you don't get the same sort of interpersonal relationships with people. And we're, again, fortunately small enough now that we can fly the whole company out to a villa or two and spend a few days all together, all on top of each other. I don't think that's going to work when we're sort of 50, 100 people, because we're going to have people with much, older families, and they're just not going to want to spend that much time away from the kids. But yeah, as it stands, I think remote first for us has been a cultural benefit. So yeah, sorry, that's all I want to say.
Bro, thanks, Kieran. Okay, Mark V, then to go from here.
Yeah, just very short. I mean, there's a certain factual differences. So let's say you're an ingrown team that are very senior and you suddenly decide to work remote. That's not a problem. If you're trying to onboard lots of junior developers, junior people, then remote is more challenging. But my experience of looking at companies, all our customers, that you could have two companies that are absolutely similar in what they need to do, their mission, they look similar, and one, the manager's adamant they all have to be in the office, and the one is adamant we don't want an office. And I think it's very much just a preference, and then you make it work with the advantages, disadvantages. You either just prefer that and you make that to work, or you prefer the other solution and try to make that to work. So I think the personal experience and your background is just makes you preference one solution. But there are factual things. So onboarding, for example, is more difficult. On the other hand, you're more productive. So generally productivity is better working from home. Innovation is better working from together. But there can always be you can manage yourself out of that and manage yourself around that. Brainstorming, I find personally quite difficult to do on a Zoom call.
Yeah.
But that's just, maybe I'm too old.
Okay, guys, we've had a number of thumbs up, and I'm keen to make sure everyone gets what they want here. So I'm going to pop a note there. If people want to revote and change the direction or the lane, just put a thumbs up on that particular post that I've put. If I don't see any thumbs, then we'll just keep going. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we kind of did what was right for you guys. Can't see any thumbs there. So Jim, did I see your hand go up for that one?
Yeah, so it was just a follow on in terms of what Mark was just saying. But please don't let me interrupt if there is a change in direction.
No, all good at this point. At this point, I think we're good. I think there's. I'm just kind of trying to balance it. And if everyone, do you know what, the conversation seems to be free flowing and changing in subjects and evolving into different things organically. But just wanted to make sure that if there were a lot of people there that wanted to shift into a different one, that we did. But I haven't seen the single thumbs up, so it looks like everyone's happy. So we'll just keep going as we were. So yeah, as you were.
Brilliant. Yeah, so I was just going to comment on the idea of remote brainstorming. So it's something we had to do extensively in my previous projects. And what I found worked pretty well was certainly leaning on some of the tools such as Miro. I mean, Miro was an absolute, was just fantastic in terms of this sort of thing. But actually using it in a very structured and moderated way. So, for example, I ran quite a few workshops where I did a lot of prep work beforehand and laid out a sequence, essentially like a structured conversation almost, with prompting questions, you know, almost like starter answers to sort of warm people up. And then in the course of the sort of the workshop remotely, all essentially employing all of the sort of standard Zoom rules around, you know, putting hands up, but then also in a friendly way, then doing a round robin and saying, okay, for this question, I'd like everyone to contribute at least one post-it note, because that way it would sort of just stimulate some conversation and keep things moving forward. And actually, I had pretty good responses from that, and they're pretty, yeah. So it essentially managed to sort of break through the quite static and nature of Zoom calls sometimes, and people felt very engaged, because even if there's conversation going on verbally and just one person talking, then other people can be like, oh, well, I'm just going to edit that post-it note that so-and-so put down because I didn't quite agree with it, or I'm going to add my own, so you had a lot of dynamic stuff happening there. But yeah, just wanted to add that.
Bit of Miro. Okay, Mark Batty.
Yeah, who was it? Kieran, I was just curious when you said that you document everything. Have you got some examples? Do you mean you document like the communication protocol and things like this, or?
No, it's, I guess so. It can be anything on the engineering side. We use things like architectural decision records
Okay,
sort of, you know, why have we made a decision? But equally, you know, whenever we have a meeting, we keep careful meeting notes. Everything is remote. And whenever people are sharing things, it's not just, you know, you don't just share a document saying, you know, or a paper saying this is interesting, because you've then had an offline conversation about why it's interesting and who is it interesting for. But you make it very clear, what is it that you're sharing? Why should someone care about it? And what should someone do next? You know, make sure that it's targeted, it's context given. And that way, when you're scrolling through our sort of cryptography research channel, our AI research channel, you can see a history of, you know, what have people shared? You know, why did they think it was worth thinking about? We use Slack very heavily for this, and encourage people to put comments in Slack. When it gets too big for Slack, we move it to Confluence or a Google Doc. And I guess similar to Jim, you know, we use Jamboards for a lot of sessions where we're doing any sort of brainstorming. And again, that gets saved. So you can go and then see what were people talking about. I also echo what Jim's saying. You have to do a little bit of setup, because if you don't do some prep, there isn't enough structure to the meeting. But, you know, being prepared is no bad thing. And similarly, before meetings, we make sure that people share an agenda. What do they expect to get out of it? And all of these things just pay off in huge amounts, because people are more prepared for the meetings. They understand what people want to get out of it. And it's something which I think you have to do when you're remote, and people should do when you're in the office. There's absolutely no reason why you wouldn't do this. But people can get lazy. And I think there's a discipline required with remote working, where nothing happens if you don't have the discipline. Whereas you can get away with it when people are all in the office. Now, it's interesting when people talking about what works and doesn't work. We are research focused. You know, most of our output is new algorithms, new approaches. So we are doing brainstorming remote. The one thing that is hard to do is two people working on a mathematical proof for something. But quite a lot of the time that is just one person working on that, and then they verify it with other people. And the nice thing here, we've got a team split between Milan and London. Asynchronous communication is just the norm because we're remote in the UK and remote in Milan. And you can say, well, this is where I got up to. You share where you've got up to, and you're clear. You just lay a paper trail. So yeah, that's what I mean. Sorry, rambling slightly.
No, that's fine, Kieran. Thanks a lot for that. Cheers.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Okay, I've just popped a link up, which Mark Batty was referring to earlier. So it's something we do if you are new or first time here. Obviously, one of the best ways that most CTOs find work is through networks. So we always massively encourage network with as many people as you can. Obviously, you've each heard a bunch of different people's opinions. I imagine you don't all know each other. So it's an opportunity just to connect with people, especially if someone's been saying something that you think, yeah, I really liked what they were saying. You can connect with them through that. So feel free to add your LinkedIn on there. And that's probably bad timing because I'm now going to ask you to vote again on where we should take the subject. So there's one new option this time, which came through from Daniel. Is Daniel still here? Yeah, Dan. So yeah, that's at the bottom there. If that's of interest, then tick that. Otherwise, just vote on the ones that you'd like to move on to next. Dan, quick, clean sweep at the moment, mate.
Oh, can't decide.
I think we've got 5 out of 6 of the votes so far. 6 out of 7, right? That's enough for me. 86% of the votes then, Dan. Do you want to ask outright what the question was and just add some context and explain further?
Yeah. Yep. So I'll give a little bit of context. So we are a team of 35, half the business is engineers distributed across the UK and Europe. We do the usual expected things. We're remote first, and we do a lot of meetups. Each team meets up in person usually once a month, and then we have all hands meetups that happen usually quarterly. The problem that we're seeing is people, and especially newer people into the team, aren't building the interpersonal connections across the team boundaries. So they don't get that meeting somebody in the cafeteria sort of experience and being able to chat and build those personal relationships. And especially for the younger members of the team, it's a lot more difficult. And so I'm really interested in what people have done to support their team members doing that.
Yeah, Mark, Betty.
Yeah, Dan, one of the things that I've done in the past that has helped, if there's enough people in the company and the team, that is a kind of hobby board where people kind of write down the kind of thing that they're interested in outside of work. It could be different sports, it could be board games, it could be, online communities, things like this. And that's a way for people to start talking about things not directly related to work, but between each other where they would have a personal interest. That's something that's worked quite well. There is an issue that I've come across. I worked in a company a few years ago where it was, let's say, very kind of low-level kind of compiler development, this kind of work. So a lot of the engineers there were, let's say, the kind of very low-level, typical autistic spectrum type individuals who have a lot of trouble with kind of building relationships with people. And that's something that takes a great deal of work to get those people to kind of build up relationships. And realistically, you need some kind of professional guidance on that. Fortunately for me at that time, it was in the office, and it's something that I've dealt with partially in the past, I suppose. So for me, it was a case of spending a lot of time with these people and finding their comfort level that they could accept, if you like. But that's something also to keep in mind, that although we all think it's a good idea to build those kind of personal relationships, some people just aren't tuned in for that and would find it incredibly difficult and challenging and something of a threat, if you like. So although those people can function in a work environment, it can be very difficult in a personal environment. Don't know.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. Nick.
We had three main ways, apart from the stuff that I've already discussed in the past. We had one that was a virtual cuppa, which was you sign yourself up for a virtual cuppa, and you will randomly get selected by anybody else with other people on the list for three of you to sit for 15 minutes online, literally having a chinwag and a cuppa about anything that occurs to you as you go. And we just found a really good way of just bringing disparate and random people within the organization. It was quite a large organization together. That one tended to work better for extroverts because it was proactive. They were going to sign up and they would happily sit there all day and have a chat with someone. So keeping them to 15 minutes was usually the problem. We also found that group collaboration worked really well. And this could actually cut across many different ones. It could be grad intake, so a load of graduates coming in and being given skills for setting up particular events or driving particular activities within the organization. It could be a particular intake cohort that's joined the organization at the same time. And again, it'd be cross-discipline, cross-team, cross-seniority, across a project as well. So they've got a common cause that they're working towards, whether it's an actual official organization project or whether it's something maybe for community or whatever it's going to be. Also by skill sets, again, common shared interest, sports interest, exactly the same. In fact, we found that the sports interest was one of the fastest ways to actually achieve this. And where it used to be the smokers club that would all meet every 10 minutes outside to have a fag in the car park, we found that cyclists are probably the most likely to actually get together. Introvert, extrovert, doesn't really matter who you are. If you're going to get on a bike and go off and do 100 miles in the pouring rain, then that seems to just drive a common brain set that brings everyone together. The third thing we did was exec sponsors. And for those people, sometimes it was part of their personal development plans or succession planning that was going in place, but also we did it for people that opted in as well. And we found that worked really well for one, just a mentoring coaching type thing. Sometimes it was reverse mentoring, where the exec sponsor had actually requested a reverse mentor, someone who's younger than them and a different experience. And we also found that was very good for linking them into people within the organization, because one or the other of them would have a completely different network and would say, oh, well, you've got that problem, or you want to know that thing. Well, this person's the person to go and see. And so just that natural sort of signposting and redirecting and collaboration promotion seemed to work really well.
Amazing stuff. Thanks, Nick. David.
So, sorry, let me just clear my throat. So I've worked for two companies over the last 20 odd years that were fully remote. The first one had about 300 employees. I was based on the west coast of the US at the time. And every day at 5 p.m., we would have to get on with our team, which typically was, some 3 to 5 members, and then just chat about stuff. We would chat about, we would have a stand up in the morning for work purposes, but then at 5 we would always get on and just, although we'll talk about any problems we had, the conversation was supposed to move off that onto other things, anything you can talk about. Sometimes those discussions lasted 2 hours, sometimes half an hour, sometimes a really short amount of time. Now, but in terms of outside your team, we had employees, I guess, up and down the West Coast. And so the 5 o'clock thing was people in your time zone, because obviously the US, there's 5 time zones. But I rarely met anyone from outside the time zone. Only sort of on quarterly events would I meet other people. So, and that was a shame, but but that connection with people in my time zone was enough, and you were moved from team to team a lot. Now in my current company, there's only 4 of us, and so it's easy. It's fairly easy to do, and plus, although we're fully remote, we meet once a week down in London. We all gather down there, and we try and do work, but most of the time we're just discussing different things. So it's a way of getting to know other people, both sort of in work and outside work. It takes a lot of time. It's like a huge time commitment, but I think it has huge benefits, especially when you in that previous company where it's fully remote, you know, hundreds of employees.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. Jim.
Yeah, so hear me okay? Yeah, just a couple of things to relate. So I just mirroring on I can't remember who was saying about the sort of smoking. So I do remember the days of the IBM smoking room many years ago, and thankfully gone now, but it certainly worked in terms of, you know, kind of making connections across the organization that you wouldn't typically expect. So that was, yeah, just I guess just an observation. And then also just wanted to relay a bit of a story, which was a particular thing that I did during the pandemic. So we were very keen to just do anything really to get people within the organization talking to each other. So we actually had, on a day-to-day basis, you know, essentially taking turns to run activities during the mandatory stand-up, which is like, no, everyone's coming, got to have some FaceTime, some connection time. Being a massive nerd, I thought what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically get everyone to play Dungeons and Dragons together. So essentially we had a kind of massive remote kind of D&D session. I mean, it was just a very light thing, but what I did is I kind of introduced the rules and I got everyone to create their own character. And that was just a really nice thing to do because it was funny, it was entertaining. I got the CEO to like tell me that he wanted to be like an elven wizard and things like that. So it was a very fun activity. So yeah, just those kind of things. If they're done, you know, it could have gone down the route of feeling like forced fun, but I think the fact I was just sort of, you know, I kind of just really leaned into it as my hobby and tried to make it something fun for everyone. So yeah, that's just a bit of a story from the pandemic, really.
Fantastic. Yeah, I like that. How were you ever nervous about asking your CEO to be a wizard or an elf?
No, it was more like because the idea was everyone had to choose what their class was. So are you a fighter? Are you a wizard? You know, so it was a little bit, it was actually getting people into the role play a little bit. So it was more the participation. So actually, and then, you know, the interesting thing was to, to give people a bit of an explanation. It's like, okay, well, why would you choose that, you know, to be a rogue? What is it about the sort of the thief lifestyle that really appeals to you? That sort of thing.
Yeah, nice.
What's that sort of thing?
We did have a community that we ran a few events for in 2020 called the London Heads of People, and it was very much for chief people officers or heads of people ops and that kind of thing. And we ran a few events then when like remote was new, and games came up quite a bit. There's a bunch of different games that you can get, and they're like for the remote stuff really good if you can play that online gaming. It was certainly a recurring theme too. Like, it doesn't replace the smoking room or, you know, the pints down after work, but it really does build those connections in a remote world. So brilliant, guys.
There's one game I can recommend. Oh, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
No, go. What was the game?
Oh, just very quickly, there is an online game you can find called Gartic Phone, which is one where you it's a little bit like telephone, where you have a phrase and then someone has to draw the phrase, and then someone has to decide what the picture represents, and you go through a series of pictures. That is very entertaining, and it's just available online, and that's a good sort of icebreaker game. So yeah, sorry, just wanted to throw that in there.
Nice. Can you put that in the Google Doc that was on the link, just so we can find it? But no, that's it. We're closing in on 4 o'clock. In fact, it's just hit 4. Thank you everyone for being here. Thanks for coming, and thanks for staying to the end. Jade or Chelsea or somebody will be in touch to talk to you about feedback. This was a different way. We have done Miro in the past, and I think where we've struggled with Miro, it's good for ideation, it's good for coming up with ideas. or just collecting what everyone wants to talk about, but it's not so good at voting. So we've had far more votes on this call than any of the other Miro ones that we've done. So that was quite good. So for anyone that's been on both of them, I'd really like to hear your thoughts on how they compare. For anyone, if this was your first, then yeah, again, appreciate knowing. Hopefully we'll see you again, and appreciate knowing how it was for you. But no, other than that, thank you all for being here, and we'll see you at the next one.
Cheers, Barry. See you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Please,